Hey everyone, I hope you guys are doing well. And I do hope that you guys are enjoying this conference as well, right? So yesterday I actually presented a topic on zero trust and how you can leverage Azure AD conditional access policies to drive your, first step towards a zero trust implementation in your organization. Today, we are going to talk about Azure AD conditional access and how we can actually leverage Azure AD conditional access along with the Intune application protection policies to make it work better for our mobile devices and our endpoints as well. So first thing first, before we get started with our session and the topic, I just wanted to bring it to your attention that this event is brought to you by Microsoft 365 Collaboration Conference. Previously, it was named as SharePoint Conference, and now upcoming Microsoft Collaboration Conference will be in next year, right? And thank you to our sponsors who helped us to make this event successful and who helped us to make this event actually, you know, event happen to make it this event happen for you guys as well, so that we can share our experience and we can share our expertise as well with you guys, so you guys can learn. So first thing first, who am I, right? Because I'm presenting here, so if the first question would be is like, who is Riaz and what he does and what he has from an experience perspective, right? So my name is Riaz Javed, and I'm a Microsoft Cloud Architect and a cybersecurity advisor. I work with the enterprise customers around the cloud security adoption and the strategies around switching from one cloud to the other cloud or transitioning completely to the cloud to drive innovation into their organization. I'm Microsoft certified trainer and a Microsoft MVP, and I do hold the security certifications like CISSP. I love to speak in the community and I love to participate in the community to share my knowledge and experience. And I do that in the form of a speaking events, answering the questions on the public forums, or writing my own blog post as well. You guys can follow me on my Twitter or my blog to get the latest and the greatest information around Microsoft solutions and the security technologies that I work on. So why do we need Intune app protection for our mobile devices, right? So before I actually jump into that, we need to first understand what is Intune app protection policy. Intune app protection policies are simply the rules that actually ensures you that your organizational data remains safe, or in other words, it remains contained in a managed application. Because a policy can be a rule that is enforced when the user is trying to, access or move corporate data, or a set of actions that are prohibited or monitored when the user is inside the application. A managed application can be an application that has app protection policies applied to it and can be managed by Intune. So why we need Intune and what are the benefits that we're going to drive with the help of an Intune application protection policies, we are actually going to talk about that. So the very first thing is Intune app protection policy is independent of mobile device management. What does it mean is, again, the name Intune, or I would say the new name is Microsoft Endpoint Manager. The name Intune, when it comes to in the picture, most of the people actually have the understanding of, oh, we need to have an Intune as our MDM. There are two distinguished parts when it comes to an Intune. One is a device management, which is mobile device management that you have. And the second one is you have application protection policies, and they can be deployed independent of each other. There is no dependency between device management and the app protection policies, right? I mean, again, they work together in a very good way. But again, if you have a different or third-party solution that you're using for your mobile device management, you can keep using that solution in your organization, like, AirWatch or Mobile Iron or Master 360 or any other third-party solution that you have in your organization. You can still use that. Now, second is application level protection, right? So we're not talking about access to your device that you can use. In fact, with the Intune app protection policies, you actually have a granular level of control with your applications. You have access to what a user can do within the application, or what a user cannot do within the application as well. And we define the policies on a per application level versus a device level or a full infrastructure level, right? So which means that I can have one policy which is true for application one. Just an example is a user cannot copy paste the data from OneDrive to a unmanaged application that could be your Google Docs or any third party cloud storage as well. But the same policy cannot be applied to a different application. Like in an email, I can have a policy that the users can copy the data from unmanaged application to a managed application, which is Outlook in our scenario, right? So we can have a policies defined on a per application level to protect the data at an application layer. Third, and the most important, whenever you talk about the security or you talk about the, enhancing the security posture for your organization, the very first thing that you need to consider is the end user impact. Because if there's a bad impact from an end user perspective or the end user productivity is impacted, then your implementation is not successful because end users are impacted and they're going to generate a lot of noise for you. So you're, even though you have an implementation which is up to the mark, but there's no end user adoption, so it's going to cause a lot of trouble for you and it's not a successful implementation. So whenever you look at the deployment of the any MDM or any security tool, you actually need to consider the end user impact as well. And Intune app protection policies, they do not impact anything on the end user side because number one, you're not restricting the users to do what they want to do on their BYOD device, okay, or their mobile device, right? You are only restricting the user's ability on how they manipulate the organizational data within the application, right? I'm restricting the user that he or she cannot copy my organizational data to his personal storage, right? In this case, it could be Google Docs, Box, or iCloud or something like that. And I'm restricting my users the ability that they cannot move my data outside of my cloud security boundaries or my organizational security boundaries on their mobile devices. On the other hand, I still allow my users, again, it all depends on your policy that you can configure, right? I I still allow my users that they can bring in, their data from a unmanaged application to a managed application as well. So there's literally no impact from an end user productivity perspective, and the users can keep on working with the data the way that they are working, and we still have the security in place that our data on the personal devices is protected and there's no impact to the user's productivity as well. And the last and the most important one is, again, you separate your work from your personal, right? When I configure the Intune app protection policies based on the containerization that I configured in my policies, I'm actually logically, I'm restricting the ability from a user's perspective or the device layer to commingle my data between the office data and the user's personal data, right? So we are separating or creating a logical boundaries between the personal and the work data so that we only manage what we need to manage and what we need to have the control for, right? We are not manipulating or controlling any of the user's personal data. We are keeping it to the corporate data only. Now, why Intune app protection policy for your mobile devices? Again, there are multiple reasons. Just on a very high level is you actually protect your company data at the application level because your mobile app management, it doesn't require you to have a device management solution in place. You can just protect your company data on both managed and unmanaged devices, right? Again, when I'm referencing the managed devices, I'm referencing the device managed through your MDM solution. The management is centered on the user identity, which means that it removes the requirement for the device management, right? Then the other one that I can think of is, your end user productivity is never impacted because the policy are not applied on the, when you apply the policy, it's not applied on the personal context, but it's applied on the application layer. The policies are more of a work context, which gives you the ability to protect company data without even touching the endpoints or the end user's data as well. The application protection policies makes it easy for you to have a layered approach towards your protection in place. For example, you can require a user to have a PIN when they are going to open up an application on a mobile device like Word, PowerPoint, or Microsoft OneDrive or stuff like that. Or you can control the sharing of the data between the applications, managed versus unmanaged application. You can prevent the saving of the company application data to the personal storage location, as well as I gave you the example of Box, right, or the Google Docs. And the last and the most important one is MDM, in addition to managed application protection policies, it makes more sense because the device will be protected. Number one, MDM is going to protect your device layer. If you guys plan to go with an Intune, or if you have an MDM solution in place, and the Intune app protection policy on top of that actually protect your application layer as well. And then there are additional features as well, or the benefits that you can consider when you're using the MDM and app protection policies together, right? But the companies as a organization, you can leverage app protection policies only with or without MDM at the same time. Just an example is consider an employee in your organization that uses both a phone that's issued by your organization and he or she actually has its own personal device as well. The company phone is actually enrolled with your MDM solution, right? And you protect that by app protection policies, while the personal device is only protected by app protection policies, right? So if you apply the app protection policies to the user without setting the device state, the user will still get the MAM policies on both the BYOD device and the company or issue device or the MDM managed device as well. You can also apply the app protection policy based on the managed state so that you can create a policy and target it to either all applications, or you can just select no and then they do nothing for you on the user side, right? So without enrollment, what you actually have, without enrolling the devices with an MDM solution, right, you actually enable your users to bring in BYOD devices. The users don't have to have a concern that they need to enroll their personal devices to a company managed device platform like Intune or, as I said, third-party solutions as well. So we only enable our users to bring in their personal device, and that personal device will not be managed by the corporate. We are only going to manage the data that resides on that personal device, which belongs to the organization. Then we look at the non-intrusive management, right? Because as I said, the management of this, all these policies is centralized and it's focused on the user identity. As I used the example previously, that if a user has two devices, one is company on, which is managed through your MDM solution like Intune, and a second device, which is personal to the user from an end user experience perspective, there's no change because your policies are applied to the user identity and the application layer as compared to the device or the device layer, right? And then you have a full privacy to the end users because you do not have a visibility when you enable the BYOD scenario or the app protection policies. You have the end user have a full privacy for his data, and we do not have any visibility to the end user's data on their personal devices. And the last and the most important one is Intune app protection policies. They work on iOS as well as Android devices. So we don't have to be worried about whether this platform is supported or not supported. Intune app protection policies support both platforms, iOS and Android. So what do we need if we have to plan for the Intune app protection policies in our organization, right? The very first step that you need and that you need to consider is you need to define your app protection policies. Again, as I said previously, each policy can have multiple options and each application can have a different policy defined based on the criticality of the data that's being stored or that's being accessed to that application, right? So you need to define your app protection policies that you want to have in place for your organization. Second, you need a broker application, right? So when I talk about the broker application, it's like your Intune company portal or Microsoft Authenticator application that works as a broker application to facilitate the communication. And then the third one and the most important one, you need the conditional access policies, right? Because if you have Intune app protection policies deployed, you actually have your policies in place, but you have your broker application as well. Then you need to have a conditional access policies where you can define what will be the action that you want to take if the user is going to try something, right? If the user is going to try some application that doesn't meet your criteria. So let's look at the first one is the app protection policies. I just had a screenshot on a very high level for you guys to show you like how it looks like when as Microsoft is changing app protection policies. So app protection policies is like just an example. If a OneDrive administrator browse to the admin.onedrive.com and select your device access, right? They can set the mobile application management control to the OneDrive and SharePoint client applications. the settings made available to the OneDrive admin console, they actually configure a special Intune app protection policies behind the scene, which is actually called as a global policy, right? And this global policy applies to all of your users. And there's no way to control that policy targeting, like I want to scope it out to my particular group of users. There's no way that you can do that. So app protection policies, they actually provide you the multi-identity support that allows an application to support multiple audience, right? You can have one application deployed to one group of people with a different controls versus the same application is deployed to another group of people that has a different configurations as well. Just an example is, you know, just consider like a context of a personal, right? Consider that a user that starts a new document in Word. This is considered personal context. So Intune app protection policies are not applied. Once the document is saved to the corporate OneDrive account, then it will be considered as a corporate context because you actually store that data into a corporate application, which is OneDrive for Business, and then Intune app protection policies will be applied. And the same thing is for another example that I can think of, from a corporate context perspective, is a user that he or she actually starts the OneDrive application by logging into the application using their work account, right? In the work context, then they cannot move files to personal storage location because they started the application like OneDrive for Business, leveraging their corporate account, and the Intune app protection policies are targeted towards the user identity, right? So when they authenticate to the application with their corporate account, they verify their identity. So any data that's stored in that application can only be moved across managed application unless you allow the policy to actually move the data from a managed application to an unmanaged application. And I just have few policies that I actually presented in the past as well to the different team that are configured. Like I can have a policy for different platforms, and I can have a different policy for a different set of applications as well, where I can define different controls and a different configurations as well when accessing or manipulating the corporate data. So what will be your end state, or what should be the end state that you as an organization or you as an administrator in your organization needs to have for your users when you're looking at the app protection policy? And this is again, this is just based on my experience and the field experience that I actually have, and then the feedback that I really get from my customers working with them. So I highly recommend that you do not actually allow your users to copy paste the data from managed application to an unmanaged application, right? Because that will defeat the purpose for you to have the Intune app protection policies. Because if I can copy the data from one managed app, let's say OneDrive, I can copy a document from there and store that document into my Google Docs or my Box.com account, which is not a corporate application, then you still do not have a control because that data is going outside of the organization's security boundaries, and you do not have access or you do not have any control to manage the access to that document, right? So whenever you configure your app protection policies, you should keep in mind that you need to restrict the access or restrict the copy and paste functionality from a managed application to an unmanaged application. Second one, you need to define the storage locations where the users are allowed to store the data when they're accessing the data from a mobile device, right? And in Intune or Intune managed application, right? From a mobile platform perspective, you can configure these storage locations as well, right? In the app protection policies, you can enforce that the users cannot store that data on their personal device. They are only allowed to store that data to the corporate application, right? Or corporate location, which is OneDrive or SharePoint Online. Third one is the PIN requirement. I haven't seen every single customer using this option, but it's really, really helpful because at times the end users do not have a PIN set up on their phone, right? So as a security control, you can actually enforce the users to have a PIN configured for the application at minimum, right? So when a user is going to access the application, he or she needs to provide the PIN before the application can be launched. Then you define your policy settings like the encryption of the data, and then if you allow the copy paste or screenshots of the data and stuff like that, it's again based on your compliance and the security requirements. You need to define those policies, and those policies can be unique for each organization. Not every single organization is the same, so we don't expect that all of you guys are going to have the same policy. And then lastly, you need to define your actions, right? You want to block, you want to wipe, or you want to warn the users based on the incorrect entries, right? If an incorrect pin is entered, what you want to do, or if an incorrect password is being entered, what will be the actions, right? So you need to think about these parameters from an Intune app protection perspective before you can actually apply any policies to the users. Second one is the broker application. As I talked about previously, you need to have a broker application. What that application can do for you and why do you need that application is because that broker application, number one, it registers the device in Azure Active Directory, right? Your broker application could be Intune Company Portal app from an Android perspective, or it could be your Microsoft Authenticator application from your iOS perspective. So it registers the devices in Azure Active Directory, and it uses the authentication behind the scene, the device authentication, and it communicates with the Azure Active Directory to keep your device up to date from a policies and their applications perspective. In Intune, that broker application is actually Intune Company Portal application that helps you to register with the Azure Active Directory. From an iOS perspective, you're looking at the Microsoft Authenticator application that performs the same functionality, and it also helps you to have a secure connection with the Azure AD to share the information with the Azure AD and fetch the information from Azure AD as well. The Authenticator application does perform other functionalities. Just an example is the MFA and the other notifications to your phone as well. And one of those functionality is to register the device with Azure AD from an Intune app protection perspective. And the last one is if a user, when he or she is trying to access the application, and they do not have a registration in place where the device is not registered or they do not have the applications installed on the device, the company portal or the application can automatically redirect the users to the store of the phone on the device, right? To fetch the application and then, install that application on the device and register the device with the Azure Active Directory. This is important because, again, as a user, it could be possible I do not have the broker application installed on my phone. So if I don't have it installed, then what will be my experience? Am I be restricted from an access perspective, or I will be just allowed to have access, right? So with the Intune app production, configurations and the if a user is trying to access something and they do not have the broker application, the user will automatically be redirected towards the Intune application, broker application in the store so that they can download and install the application at their own. And now the last and the most important one, the conditional access policies. So we, as of now, we are done like with the Intune app production policies. Just as an example is, we have defined the policies, we have defined the, what will be my encryption requirements, my storage location for my devices, right? What will be the user's behavior? What will be the behavior within the application? How the users are going to be, accessing or getting the policy updates and everything. That has been done. Now, the last and the most important piece is how do we make sure that the users are using the applications that they need to use, right? Just an example is we configure the Intune app protection policy to say that for Outlook client that there are certain behaviors that the users cannot do within the Outlook application, right? But what if the user is not using Outlook application? The user is probably using a native mail app on iOS or Android device, right? The users are not using that particular application to do the job, but they are using a different application that does the same functionality, and they're doing their day-to-day job with their different application as well. So that's where the conditional access policies comes into the play, where you need to define your conditional access policies, and within the conditional access policies, you need to define your requirements and the controls for the users. So first policy that I recommend as well is that you require your users to have a managed application. Now, what is a managed application? As I defined earlier as well, a managed application is any application that has an Intune app protection policies deployed, right? That's a very simple definition that I can share with you is it's an application that has an Intune app protection policies deployed, and you can actually have the users to have that application on their phone when they're going to access a certain service. Again, Outlook is one of the examples, right? The user is trying to access the emails, and we actually enforce that on the mobile devices. The only way that you can access emails on the mobile devices if you have the managed application. And in the managed application, we have a predefined list of the managed applications from a Microsoft perspective that are available to you, which means the user are only allowed to access the emails on their mobile devices if they are using one of the managed application for email. It's the Outlook client, right? So they need to have Outlook client on their mobile phone to access the emails. Now, on the other side, once the user actually have the Outlook client on their phone to access the emails, then your Intune app protection policies on top of that will apply the application specific restrictions or application specific security controls for you, where the user cannot download that content on their personal storage, right? Anytime they need to store anything from that application, that storage needs to be either OneDrive for Business, SharePoint Online, or whatever location that you define in your policy. How the data encryption will be handled from an application storage perspective, right? How you want to have the users to have the access or share that application content with external parties or the external resources outside of the logical boundary on the mobile phone as well. So requiring the managed application through a conditional access policy makes sure that the only way that the users can have access to the corporate application is to have through a managed application, and then managed applications are protected with your Intune app protection policies. Then the second one is you need to block legacy authentication. There's no question on that why, I would say, but legacy authentication is a very sweet spot from a bad actor perspective. If you guys are leveraging anything in your organization that's using legacy authentication, I would highly recommend you guys that go back, evaluate that application, evaluate the code, and see what are the necessary actions that you need to take to transition from the legacy authentication to the modern authentication, which is OAuth. In Exchange Online, the legacy authentication like IMAP, POP, or basic authentication protocols, right? You should disable them, right? And now there are two different ways from an Office 365 perspective that you can do. One is, and again, you actually have to do both configurations, right? One is you need to disable that within your Exchange Online. And the second one is your identity platform, right? Because Exchange Online leverage a different Active Directory for us behind the scene versus the Azure Active Directory, right? So you need to disable the basic authentication or the legacy authentication protocols in Exchange Online, which again is a continuous job because it's like literally on a per mailbox level. So you can create an automation script to leverage the Azure automation to do that. The second piece is the identity layer, right? In Azure Active Directory, you can configure the conditional access policies and there are built-in controls available that you can leverage to create the conditional access policies that block the legacy authentication for your users across the organization. I agree with everybody that, if you guys are thinking that you have applications that your business cannot live without, and those applications are using basic authentication or the legacy protocols, we can have different custom policies, right? When you look at your conditional access policies, and if you guys didn't look at my yesterday's session or didn't get a chance to attend that, you can look at the recordings as well, and you will see that. So when we talk about a basic authentication protocol and we talk about blocking it, that should be the policy for everybody, right? If there are some exceptions, like a service account within the application that leverage basic authentication, we can bypass that service account and have a separate policy for that that will allow the basic authentication for that service account from a specific IP address only, right? Which is that IP address can be of your application. So you actually restrict your secure, the service account ability to use this basic authentication within your application. If for some reason a bad actor, or I would say for any reason, a bad actor is trying to compromise the service account using the brute force attack, and somehow he or she actually got access and now trying to authenticate with a basic authentication protocol on the network, right? Then you actually had a policy which is restricting the ability to use the basic authentication protocol on your network layer, because you only allow that exception from a particular source or used from a particular application versus keeping it broadly open for everybody. And then again, the exchange active sync is kind of a, I would say a kind of a same thing from a legacy authentication perspective, because exchange active sync it does use the legacy protocols as part of its authentication process, but there's a separate conditional access policy which is more targeted towards your mobile devices, and you should have that policy configured in your environment, and you should be actually configuring the actions of, block it, restrict the ability for the users to use the active sync protocol. And because if you restrict the user's ability to use active sync protocol and enforce them to just use a managed application, they are enforced to use an application because that doesn't support basic authentication, right? That they are enforced to use an application which has an Intune app protection policies deployed on top of that, right? So which means they have very limited hours. So their only option that they will end up with is Outlook, right? So they have to have Outlook on their Android or iOS devices if they want to access the corporate data and those applications, because they do support, like Outlook do support the uh, modern authentication protocol. You can have your additional layer of identity controls on the mobile devices as well, or the application data on the mobile devices like MFA, or you just block the user ability to access the data, or you can, perform other controls as well based on the conditional access policies. Key is to restrict the user ability to use the legacy protocols and enforce the users to use your corporate managed applications so that they are enforced to use the applications which have the policies in place from a user's behavior with the data as well, where you are restricting the ability for the users and protecting your corporate data within that logical container as well. This is the error message typically that the users will see when they try to access a application or the document or the content when there's a conditional access policy deployed, right? So just an example is if I have a conditional access policy that's restricting the user ability to use a non-managed application, right? So I'm trying to access some content which through an application which is not a managed app, or I'm trying to access like email data using ActiveSync, or I'm trying to access through an application. Just an example is, that leverage basic auth, unless that source is, added into the exception as a user, I will get this error message, right? That clearly talks about like, it looks like what resources that I'm trying to open it up, it's not approved by my IT department, right? So I need to use one of the approved applications. And then again, in the more details, if the users click on that, they can see the list of the details, but I'm just enforcing my users with these policies to make sure they use my approved application where I actually have control, where I have my Intune app protection policies deployed. So with that being said, now let's look at the action items that we should consider when we go back after this session and evaluate the security of our data on our mobile devices is what we need to do, right? So first thing first, you need to have Intune app protection policies. So look into your configurations, start defining the policies that you have. And again, you can have a, scope deployment where you can just have the deployment of to 1, 2, or 3 or 4 users at max, just an example, or just an IT department for your pilot purpose. Define the policies, test those policies on the phone, and then, before you roll it out to everybody, do your all end-to-end testing of the user's behavior, and then define your user communication as well. Then the second one is you need to enforce the policies with the help of conditional access. Configuring the Intune app protection policies alone is not going to help you. Intune app protection policies with Azure AD conditional access, they work better together, because if you have an Intune app protection policy configured, just an example for your email clients, right, where you define that, from my email client perspective, these are my restrictions, or my storage perspective, these are my restrictions. What if, as a user, I do not use that client on my phone, right? As a user, I'm not using Outlook, I'm using ActiveSync. You do not have any policy that enforce me to use the Outlook application on my phone for my email access, right? So Intune app protection policies, and then you need to make sure that you have the conditional access policies that enforce me to use the applications which are approved by my IT department to access my corporate data. Please look at your legacy authentication or the active sync protocols and make sure that you disable them. I mean, block those protocols in your environment. It is sending the data in a clear text for you, like use the basic authentication or the legacy protocols, and it's pretty straightforward and easy for the bad actor to kind of a bypass your other controls and just look at the legacy authentication. Because again, basic authentication, just an example, it doesn't support MFA as well. So you are actually opening up your environment where password is the key to your kingdom, and a bad actor can probably use a brute force attack or other techniques to get the credential information of the users to get into your organization. So block legacy authentication, that will also help you to drive your authentication security by leveraging MFA, just an example, right? And you can configure MFA through conditional access policies as well. And then the last one is keep your users productive all the time. Again, we have security controls that we need to define and implement. On the other side, if the users are still productive, we have a good adoption. And if we have a good adoption, we have a good control of our data security parameters as well, right? So as I said, Intune app protection policies, they do not have any control, or they do not manipulate anything from an end user perspective for their day-to-day productivity. So configuring these policies, implementing them within appropriate communication and the change management in the organization, you are still keeping your end users uh, productive, and you have the control of your data as well, right? You are actually asking the users to use the applications where you have your protection in place, and you have all the data controls that you have in place as well. And with that being said, thank you for joining us, and thank you for joining my session as well about the Intune app protection and Azure AD conditional access. I will now open up the forum for the questions. And I do have my information over here as well, just in case if you guys want to connect with me via LinkedIn, Twitter, or reach out to me via my blog post as well. Any
Great
questions?
session. Good stuff.
Thank you.
Let me see if we got any questions, and I do want to invite all the attendees to post any questions if you have any. So please use the Q&A. We have some time left. So I do see one question, and let me tell you what it is.
Sure.
It's kind of funny written, I think. Are there some visionaries which cite when it will be possible to have multiple organizational accounts, all protected with MOM on single mobile app like Outlook?
So if I understand the question correctly, so we are looking at multiple organizational accounts, right? And I'm considering that, those accounts are from different organizations. Like just an example, I'm a consultant, right? I have an account in my organization. I do have account in my customer organizations as well, right? and then you are looking at a control deployed across all my accounts. If that's the case, to be honest with you, I mean, if that's what you are asking from a question perspective, then the answer is no. And I can explain why I'm saying no is because each organization has its own policies from a data protection perspective, right? My account within my organization, like that I work for, in my organization, they might have a different data protection regulations that they need to follow versus another organization that deals in, let's say in the payment card industry or the financial industry or the medical industry, right? They have different data protection regulations that they need to follow and adhere with. So having, you know, multiple accounts with one policy is not going to help because it can contradict between the organization, between the industries as well, right? I mean, again, everybody wants to protect their data, which is the common parameter for everyone. But again, protection can have a different, I would say the perspective for each organization or the each business vertical, right? So one policy for multiple accounts in different organizations is not going to help, and we will probably have different accounts. So, but one thing is, again, on my mobile phone, just an example, if I have a policy, if I have an application like OneDrive, right, and the moment I'm going to sign in from my corporate account to my OneDrive, it's going to get or inherit the policies from my corporate Intune app productions, right? If I'm going to log into that OneDrive for one of my customers tenant, right, it's going to inherit the policy from that because again, as I said, these policies are tied up with the user identity. So the moment I'm going to log into that application with my identity, it's going to get those policies, and my identity is not going to be same across all organizations. Each organization has my different identity, although from a personality perspective, I'm the same person, right? But computers doesn't know that.
Okay, clear. So we have two other questions. This is also, let me see if I can phrase this correctly, but any lights on Azure AD joined as the first users become the local administrator. True, they have corporate devices. Autopilot is not an option as the computers are already in use. Question mark. Can you extract the question out of that? So the first part is any lights on Azure Active Directory joined as the first users become the local administrator.
So yeah, so I think again, this is off the topic, but just an FYI, if I understand you correctly. So we have a user device, right, that is joined to Azure AD. Again, it's not registered, it's joined to Azure AD. When the device is being joined to the Azure Active Directory, again, this can be done when you're doing the autopilot component, right? So with an Intune autopilot, and that goes to the discussion of your MDM. Your first user, like based on the policies that you configure, yeah, he or she can become the local admin, and then in Azure Active Directory or in Intune as well, you do actually have the option to configure who can be my local admin, right? So you can define those policies in Intune for the device configuration to make sure who can have local admin access to the device. But it's more on the MDM side, not on the app protection perspective. The Intune app protection policies, they are more focused on your mobile devices, right? As I said, this I'm targeting your mobile devices like Android or iOS, and those devices are actually registered with Azure AD. They are not Azure AD joined. Hope that answered the first part. What was the second part of the question?
True, they are corporate devices. Autopilot is not an option as the computers are already in use.
Okay, so all right, so you want to have you have the computers which are Azure AD joined, and you do not have the option to do the autopilot. So you want to change the local admin user access as well, right? So yeah, I mean, if you had those computers being managed through Intune, not the autopilot Intune, you can configure the configuration profiles, and you can have, restrict the user's ability on who can have local admin access. But just an FYI, I can probably share that after this session, or you can connect me via LinkedIn or Twitter. I can share that information with you. Um, when Microsoft actually bring in their concept of the modern management or the modern desktop management, there were three different options, right? One was Azure AD Register, which typically our BYOD devices, like our mobile phones or BYOD devices. Then hybrid Azure AD join, which means my device is joined to the on-premises Active Directory, and it's synchronized to Azure AD and register with Azure AD, and it shows up as a hybrid AD join in Azure. And the third option is Azure AD join, which is a purely a modern management, right? And when Microsoft actually bring in this concept as well, the goal is like, as a user, just an example, right? I have a device which is Azure AD Join. In fact, this laptop that I'm presenting from is Azure AD Join. So this laptop is Azure AD Join. As a bad actor, even if you compromise my laptop, just an example, you cannot make any lateral movement part to the domain admin account. You cannot make any lateral movement part to my domain administrator or global administrator accounts in 365, right? It's its own identity. Yes, as a bad actor, once I hack your PC or I have access to your PC, at max, I can probably grab address book from your Outlook client, right? I can
Hmm.
reach out some other users to share some malicious files, but I do not have a way to do a lateral movement path. So it is by design, but in case if you want to change that, right? As for the Azure AD join, if you want to change that functionality once the device is joined, you can configure the configuration profile or the configuration settings for the Windows platform. If I'm assuming it's Windows PC, uh, that can actually replace or update your local administrator profile as well for the users, like who can be a local admin or who cannot be a local admin.
Okay. So in about 7 minutes, we have another keynote from Microsoft, and I think we have one more question. So let's do that one last question and then wrap it up. So this is, I think, a very specific deployment question. I'm not sure if it's a generic thing, but we have somebody asking, like, currently we have our Intune users excluded from the block exchange synchronization conditional policy. What might break if we added them to the block exchange sync policy?
So, okay, yeah, simple as that. It's going to break their active sync client.
Okay.
If they have emails configured on their mobile phone, it's not going to work, right? And again, I'm just assuming that's it, unless you have a second component of your, managed application policies and stuff like that. Then it will go further into the details of, that it will break for the users that do not use, I would say, the application that you require. Like if they're not using Outlook application because it's an Intune managed application, or it's a managed app that can have Intune app protection policies. So out of those, let's say, block of users, if X number of users are using Outlook, they will still be using it if you have the other conditional access policy that asks the users to use applications or the managed application. And the
Okay.
other block of the user that do not use Outlook application using native app or something, it's going to break for them. It's not going to no longer work for them.
Clear. I see we have 4 more questions. Let's see what we can do, but maybe some short answers. And we still have over 30 people in the session. So let's see. A variation on the first question: does an app policy apply to a secured app like Outlook or Word means that a user cannot use any personal accounts?
So no, so you don't want to restrict the user ability because that's your end goal, right? You want the users to do whatever they want to do. You just want to manage your corporate data, right? And that's why when you configure the app policy, like for Outlook,
Clear.
you still allow the users to use their personal email accounts as well, and you just manage the data for your corporate corporate profile or corporate email profile.
Yeah. Okay. Another quick one. Do you have to rejoin or relog on every time you power on or restart your mobile device?
No, that's not the case. So it goes back to the authentication parameter, just an FYI, on a very high level. Azure Active Directory does use the access and the refresh tokens on the backend that automatically re-authenticate, right? If the moment you restart your device, that refresh token needs to be refreshed and that time is gone, it's timed out and stuff like that, then yes, you need to sign back in. Or once you actually restart your device, it should actually leverage the previously issued token to revalidate the user's connectivity.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Um, very quick one. I think that's, I'm not sure if it's related to security, but would a Power App running on a mobile device be able to obtain the identity info from the logon?
I'll be very honest with you. I never saw this scenario,
Yeah.
but Power Apps does leverage Azure AD on the backend for authentication,
Yeah.
just an FYI.
So and that's actually something I can answer. In the Power App, you can get the current user by using the user connector. So as soon as you're logged on, Power Apps knows who the user is if you allow that connector. So that's a yes if you use that. I think that might also be an answer to the question. And then really the last one, I think that's also a follow-up on an earlier question. I need pure AAD joined and enrolled in Intune. Right now we do it through IT, and then we left the users log on, so they become the standard users. We do not get what we need, but it's just too much. Sure, I will reach out to you for that. Oh, okay, it's not a question.
Yeah, I mean, reach out to
comment.
me. I have seen these scenarios a lot, to be very honest with you. So that's not a big deal. Reach out to me. I can share some of my, experience with you as well, and can guide you some of the configuration that you guys can do to get it done.
Good. So for the rest, we're getting in a lot of thank yous based on the answers you're giving and on your session. So that was great. Thank you also from me for this great session. And
Thank you, guys.
yeah,